On 4th of August 2020, the 6th largest man-made non-nuclear explosion occurred. Over 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate, left abandoned in silos in Beirut's port, exploded. 218 people were killed and 300,000 made homeless. The city was ruined. But the Beirut port explosion was not seen as a singular tragedy, but as a culmination and a defining symbol of a nation in despair. Since 2019, Lebanon's currency has collapsed, its banking sector has imploded. Nearly 80% of the population are living in poverty. But Lebanon was once heralded as the Switzerland of the Middle East. Beirut as the Paris of the Orient. Only 60 years ago, Lebanon was once seen as an economic success story. So how did Lebanon, a nation that managed to prosper despite civil wars, invasions and occupations, succumb to its own political infighting and economic mismanagement to become one of the poorest countries in the world? On the 3rd of January 1916, Colonel Mark Sykes and the diplomat François Picot signed a memorandum between Britain and France. The conclusion of the agreement between Sykes and Picot succeeded in determining how the Ottoman territories in the Middle East would be carved between Britain and France once World War I was over. France would take everything north of the town of Deraa, an area covering what is modern-day Syria and Lebanon, and Britain would take control of the area to the south, what is today Iraq, Jordan, Israel and Palestine. The French divided their new colonial territory in two, forming a large Muslim-dominated land and a smaller coastal region that held a Christian majority. This became Lebanon. The economy of Lebanon during the colonial period was almost entirely based on agriculture, which the French tried to develop in order to boost exports. However, it wasn't France's inability to build Lebanon into a major agricultural exporter that eventually doomed their colonial rule, but instead it was events back in Europe that would finally give Lebanon her independence.
In England, General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his deputy commanders chart the liberation of a lost continent, plan when and where the mighty armies of the United Nations will strike.
The Second World War changed the fate of Lebanon. France, the country's colonial master, was overrun and conquered by the Nazis in May 1940. De Gaulle, the leader of the Free French, retreated to London. With neither the Vichy French government under the Nazis, nor the Free French able to effectively manage France's Middle East empire, de Gaulle proclaimed Lebanon's independence on the 22nd of November 1943. The post-war period saw Lebanon flourish economically. The newly independent state used lax banking regulations to draw in customers from across the Arab world, newly rich from the region's oil boom. However, as cracks began to appear in Lebanon's fractious ethnic, religious and political makeup, the stability began to wane. But in fact it wasn't internal instability that began Lebanon's downfall, but factors to the country's south that would spell doom for Lebanon.
But it was the rising tension in Palestine that held world attention. Partition had brought a new flare-up in the strife between Arab and Jew. Politically, the conflict appeared to be settled. In actual fact, it had only just begun.
The war between Arabs and Jews in British Mandate Palestine started before the British had even left. Almost as soon as the United Nations announced its plan to partition the land between the Jordan River and Mediterranean Sea, Arab and Jewish communities began clashing, vying for territorial gains. These clashes culminated in the First Arab-Israeli War. The Israelis won, creating the State of Israel and displacing millions of Arab Palestinians in the process. For the Palestinians, this event is known as the Nakba, catastrophe. However, it proved not only to be a catastrophe for the Palestinians, but its wide-reaching impacts would be the root cause of Lebanon's own catastrophe only a few decades later. founding of the State of Israel in 1948 would forever change Lebanon. Over 250,000 Palestinians, displaced by the creation of Israel, moved north. Lebanon had been created by the French to be a majority Christian nation, separating it from majority Muslim Syria in order to prevent the Christians being a minority within a Muslim majority state. Social and economic tensions rose between Christian and Muslim communities. Compounding these tensions was the presence of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, in southern Lebanon, which they used as a base to attack Israel. Inter-community and religious tensions, as well as frustration with the PLO's presence, boiled over in 1975, igniting Lebanon's civil war.
نتأمل يوما ما يكون في دولة مضبوطة، يكون في شرعية مضبوطة.
On the 14th of September 1982, Gamal Bashir addressed a gathering of his Christian Falangist political and military group at their headquarters in eastern Beirut. It was his first speech as the president of Lebanon. Before the speech was over, a bomb was detonated, killing Bashir and 26 others. 2 days later, as many as 3,500 Palestinian Muslims were massacred at the Shatila refugee camp by Falangist forces, supported by Israeli troops. Around the world, many had seen Bashir as a leader that could bring an end to Lebanon's bloody civil war. The Shatila massacre showed his death would do the exact opposite.
Until last year, this corner of Beirut was crammed with clubs, bars and brothels. Now the music stopped and the girls have fled. Instead, the streets shudder under shell fire and snipers pick off the unwary with a single bullet.
Lebanese people say the civil war never ended. The different factions just put down their guns and used politics to fight instead. In many ways, this is true. Lebanon's civil war officially ended in October 1990. A new constitution was agreed, dividing power between the different ethnic and religious groups that made up Lebanon. Although the Taif Agreement was successful in stopping the war, the new constitution it produced eventually acted as a key foundation for Lebanon's current economic crisis. In the post-Civil War years, Lebanon became heavily reliant on foreign debt. Government bureaucracy ballooned as different factions used their control over different government entities to bolster their own faction's position. Free market reforms adopted following the Taif Agreement also transformed Lebanon's economy towards a highly service-based model, with little manufacturing or agriculture to provide a firmer economic base. Service industries require ready capital from banks in order to operate and expand. As Lebanon's foreign currency reserves dwindled due to the massive outstanding foreign debts, the country's currency, the Lebanese pound, devalued. This in turn reduced the ability of Lebanese banks to continue to provide credit to the wider service-based economy. The culmination of these factors, the almost complete collapse of the Lebanese economy. On the 16th of February 2011, a group of children were arrested in the Syrian town of Deraa. Their crime? Spray painting the words, "It's your turn next, Dr. Bashar al-Assad," on the wall of their school. The children were detained for weeks and horrifically tortured. The Arab Spring had been sweeping across the Middle East. When massive anti-government protests began in Syria following the children's detention, yet again wider regional factors and instability in neighbouring countries would have a profound impact on Lebanon. The onset of the Syrian civil war in 2011 had a dramatic impact on the economy of Lebanon. Whereas Lebanon's civil war had sent millions of refugees pouring across the border into neighbouring Syria, now Syria's civil war sent millions of displaced people into Lebanon. Between 2011 and 2016, Lebanon's population grew by almost half, as 1.5 million Syrians sought refuge in the country. The refugee influx placed enormous strain on Lebanon's already weak economy. Though Syrian refugees were barred from employment, most found work in Lebanon's black market. This expanded the labour pool beyond capacity, driving down wages across Lebanon. Infrastructure, housing and public services couldn't meet the increased demand. But it wasn't only the population influx that put strain on the Lebanese economy. Syria's civil war took offline Lebanon's largest trading partner. Most Lebanese were happy to offer assistance to their Syrian kin in their time of need. But although the impact of the Syrian civil war is not the only cause of Lebanon's economic collapse, the enormous economic strain refugees placed on Lebanon's already fragile economy only hastened the inevitable economic catastrophe. Lebanon's economic foundation had always been weak. However, the post-Civil War years' over-reliance on foreign credit, combined with the political system's inability to adjust to circumstances accordingly due to its complex network of patrons and political alliances, spelled doom for Lebanon. The civil war in neighbouring Syria, destroying Lebanon's largest export market and sending millions of refugees into the country, weakened what was already a highly precarious economic and political system. Lebanon's problem today is how to find a way out of the economic catastrophe it's experiencing. Economic reforms are on the table, but the country's paralysed political elite remain too focused on jostling for position and are unable to agree on the significant reforms that are needed. Foreign donors, vitally needed to provide funds to Lebanon's broken economy, are unwilling to come on board until there is economic and political clarity. This leaves Lebanon paralysed, whilst millions of ordinary Lebanese struggle to survive.